Welcome back everyone to the 5th game of the World Chess Championship match. Apart from the first game, things have been pretty even so far. The first 4 games have all been drawn. Caruana has white in game 5 and he opens with e4, his go-to move in this match. Carlsen again responds with c5, the Sicilian defense. We have knight f3, knight c6, and Caruana goes for the Rossolimo, which has been a theme so far in this match. Carlsen plays g6. So in the previous, in games 1 and 3, Caruana took on c6, but here he decided to castle. Carlsen continues his development. We have rook to e1, and here e5 from Carlsen. Quite a double-edged move, controlling the d4 square, but also weakening d5. But for the moment, it's not such a big deal. Black can always cover that square with a knight. So here, normal developing moves such as knight to c3 and d6 come to mind. But Caruana goes for something very interesting. He plays b4 in this position, gambiting a pawn. So how does Black react in this situation? The two most obvious moves are c takes b4 and knight takes b4. So what happens if c takes b4? So white can go bishop b2 in this position, just developing, or he can even try to play a3. Black can choose to ignore this with b3, but let's see what happens if that is taken. So after bishop takes a3, white gets excellent play along this diagonal, and black has to be quite careful here. If he tries d6, then things could go very wrong for him. d4 from white gives him excellent play, threatening to go d5 because this knight is pinned. So if black tries to take on d4, then e5 opens up the position and white just has a fantastic initiative. So here the knight is pinned, it cannot capture the rook. So after d4, black shouldn't take on d4, but let's see what happens if he tries to unpin with bishop to d7. So here, if bishop takes d6, then black has knight to d4, knight takes d4, opening up a discovery on the bishop. So here white should go knight b to d2, preparing to go knight c4, taking on d6 with the knight, which would eliminate black's chances of castling. So if knight to e7, knight g to e7, then simply knight c4. And this weakness on d6 makes things very unpleasant for black. So here, knight takes d4 doesn't work because simply knight takes d4 from white. And then here, knight to c4, threatening knight takes d6. So bishop takes d6 can be met by knight takes d6. Then you can pick up the bishop. So here, if bishop to e5, trying to defend d6, white can still take on d6, and after bishop takes, it seems that black has won a piece here. Bishop takes b5. But after queen takes d4, white has a very nice position. Queen takes d4 comes with tempo on the rook. So if queen here to f6, then simply bishop e5. You don't really want to play f6 in this position. White will most probably play e5, and this seems crushing. So here knight to f6, if that is played, then queen e5 check, king d7, and simply bring the other rook into the game, rook a to d1, threatening discoveries with the bishop. This just looks lost for black. So after b4, taking all of that into consideration, here Carlsen plays knight takes b4, not allowing the idea of a3 and bishop takes a3. Caruana continues on with bishop b2. We have a6 from Carlsen. So here if white retreats, bishop to f1, then after d6, black is just up a healthy pawn. So Caruana has to try and complicate things. Here he plays a3. So if the knight retreats, then white can go bishop takes c6, and then knight takes e5. Things are good for white. So after a3, Carlsen goes a takes b5, a takes b4, the rooks are traded. d6, protecting the pawn, b takes c5, so here if that is taken, then e5 is unprotected. So Carlsen goes knight to e7, preparing the castle. Queen to e2 from Caruana. Just looking at b5. So other possible moves for white in this position are to take on d6. He can also play knight to a3, trying to go after the pawn on b5. So he doesn't really want to play knight c3 in this position because that simply blunts out the bishop on a1. But here Carlsen goes queen to e2. So black cannot defend that pawn with bishop d7 because now the queen doesn't protect the pawn on d6, simply c takes d6. So here Carlsen plays after queen to e2, he plays b4. Queen to c4 now from Caruana, looking at this weak pawn. Queen to a5, defending, also attacking the bishop on a1. So here Caruana plays c takes d6. So if queen takes a1, then after d takes e7, this bishop is now undefended. And also black can't really castle in this position because the pawn controls this f8 square. So if king takes, then black forfeits his right to castle. So here if bishop d7, then knight c3 opens up a discovery on the queen, and white is preparing to plant his knight on this beautiful d5 square. And white just has a great position. So after c takes d6, Carlsen goes bishop to e6, attacking the queen. Queen c7, offering an exchange of queens, which Carlsen accepts. Queen takes c7, d takes c7, knight to c6. So at the moment Caruana is up a pawn, but c7 looks like it's going to fall anytime soon. So one idea for Caruana is to go rook to d1, trying to break with d4. If king d7, white goes d4, threatening to go d5, which would fork the knight and the bishop. If e takes d4, then after the exchanges on d4, here rook takes d4 comes with check. If king takes c7, rook takes b4, white would be up a pawn with small winning chances. So the problem is that after d4, black doesn't have to take. Here Caruana probably didn't like bishop g4, just pinning this knight, which makes things quite annoying for white. So here d takes e5 would be less effective. After king takes, if knight bd2, then here Carlsen can even take on e5 because of the pin. So after knight c3, Caruana went c3. But now Magnus equalizes very quickly. He plays king d7, approaching the pawn. C takes b4. Here rook to a8. Carlsen activates his last piece with tempo on the bishop. Bishop c3, king takes c7, d3, king to b6 from Carlsen, trying to go after this pawn at some point. Also getting out of any potentially dangerous pins on the c-file. So another interesting idea is to go b5, just to fix this pawn on b4, with ideas of rook coming to a4. But Carlsen plays king to b6, bishop to d2, rook to d8 from Carlsen, switching focus to the weak pawn on d3. Looks like Fabi is going to be down a pawn, but here he has calculated that bishop e3 check would lead to a drawish position. King b5, knight c3 check, king takes b4. So it looks like white is in trouble. If he goes knight to e2, then rook takes d3, and black is going to try and use his extra pawn to win the game. If rook b1, then black can try and block with rook to b3 to keep this extra pawn. But here Caruana has worked out that he has knight d5 check, which gives him excellent piece activity after bishop takes, rook takes, then here he has rook to b1 check. Carlsen plays king to c3, and now rook takes b7, eliminating black's only winning hope. And now white has a very active rook on the 7th rank, currently looking at f7. Carlsen plays knight to d8, trying to hold on to the f7 pawn. But here rook c7 check, allowing Carlsen to take on d3, and then king to f1, controlling the e2 square. And here black even has to be a bit careful about some mating net ideas. For instance, like knight coming to e1 check, which would force the king to e4, and then ideas like king e2, g4, threatening to play the move f3, and then this f5 square would be covered by the pawn on g4. So black has to be a bit careful, but Carlsen of course sees this and he plays h5, stopping any ideas of white going g4. Here Caruana plays h3, reinforcing this idea, but king to e4 from Carlsen, stepping out of the mating net ideas. But now Caruana simplifies the position with knight g5 check. So king to f5 from Carlsen, knight takes f7, rook takes f7, and bishop f6. So now there's not much to play for in this position, and both players agreed to a draw. So it is worth noting that the idea of g4, h takes g4, h takes g4, hoping for king takes g4 and then rook takes f6, but this doesn't work because black can simply play king back to e6. So after 5 games, everything is still even. Carlsen has the white pieces for games 6 and 7, so he will most likely try his best to push for a win. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to share, like, and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon.